Do you have an opinion on trans athletes, childhood vaccines, Alberta separatism? They're all hot button issues, but what if you're being tricked into feeling a certain way, with people secretly paying to sway your point of view? Welcome back to Big If True, Season 2. I'm Molly Thomas. We're all influenced to a certain extent by public opinion, friends caring about a cause, rallies in our communities, or even petitions to sign. It feels organic and grassroots, but what happens when it's not? It's called astroturfing. The name comes from the artificial grass that's used on some sports fields. But it's also a term used to describe fake grassroots campaigns secretly funded by corporations or political groups. It can be everything, from paying people to protest, recruiting influencers to push a certain message, or deploying bots to churn out thousands of similar posts. The ultimate goal? To influence how you think, feel, and act. Tonight, we talk to an American businessman who unapologetically hires people to protest. Yeah, you heard that right. Plus, a policy expert weighs in on how to spot these fake campaigns. But first, let's start with a researcher who's watching how astroturfing plays out in Canada. Angus Bridgman is the director of the Media Ecosystem Observatory, whose recent report talked about this very subject. Angus, so great to have you on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so where are you seeing examples of astroturfing in Canada?
So there's a few different places you're going to come across it. The most obvious ones are the major kind of social media platforms. So specifically kind of like Facebook, Instagram, X. What you're going to see on these platforms is accounts that maybe you don't recognize, groups maybe you don't recognize, posts. And there's just a lot of information manipulation going on across these platforms. And there's a lot of people trying to convince you that something exists or some attitude exists that that isn't actually real or doesn't represent a large number of Canadians.
So give me an example.
So there was this really interesting kind of case of a Facebook group with about 20,000 members that was sort of Canadians for 51st statehood.
Okay.
It was this real kind of, okay, so 20,000 Canadians are supporting this. And this kind of sort of a group that was active almost immediately after sort of Trump began joking, not joking about that. And if you go into the group and you kind of look at the history of the group, it's immediately apparent that it's actually not 20,000 Canadians who believe that. And instead, it's an old Facebook group that got purchased or sold or repurposed and changed its name from actually just a buy and sell group. So it used to be a buy and sell group. If you scroll down far enough, years and years, you're going to see, couches for sale, house for rent. And then all of a sudden there's this switch and it's all hyper political content, very polarizing, and a smaller number of people posting, a lower level of engagement. But it's a great example of where if you were just scrolling by and you looked at that and you went, oh, 20,000 Canadians, okay, like it's not a huge number, but it's enough to sort of take note. But actually, it's not 20,000 Canadians. It's just a few. Look, there's marketplaces where you can buy social media engagement. You can buy bots, you can buy groups, you can buy campaigns. There is a whole marketplace around marketing, but also political use of social media. Now, those accounts get blocked eventually. That's against the terms of service. The platforms generally don't want you doing that. But it is enormously easy to do that and to do these sort of spark astroturfing campaigns where you make something appear to be kind of a groundswell, even when it isn't.
Why do you think, Angus, that this works so well?
You're hijacking this sort of fundamental human idea. You're this impulse. We're social creatures. We care what our fellow citizens think. It's the same idea as if you kind of read a public opinion poll and you think, oh, okay, the majority of Canadians think this. What you're trying to tap into is our desire to identify with our co-citizens or our neighbors. And so if you can make somebody believe that the community around them thinks a certain way, even if they don't, it becomes very easy to start to believe that too.
But who is behind that, Angus? And is there a specific goal? I know we're talking about many different campaigns, but is there a goal?
There's sort of two big drivers of this. One is money. And we've seen that a lot in the Canadian context. We saw it with massive amounts of ads that run across X and Meta to this day that are sort of engaged in crypto scams using political content. what they're trying to do is to mobilize kind of people's attention and engagement in online spaces, and they're trying to monetize that, uh, trying to cash in on online influence and the way that system works. So money is one obvious one, but of course there's political campaigns as well, and there's using social to try to convince people, and generally the people engaged in this might not think of themselves as doing something deceitful or manipulative. They're running a marketing campaign. Everyone else is doing it. This is just the way politics works right now. There's infinite justifications for why you're engaging in this behavior. But at the end of the day, ultimately, what you're trying to do is to convince people of something that isn't true, or to convince people of something you want, but is not necessarily in their interests.
In your report, you pointed out some, I remember seeing some pictures from Alberta about the Alberta separatism campaign. From Ontario, we're watching from this side thinking, how many people in Alberta actually want to separate? Is it a big group? Is it a small group? What did you find about that?
Yeah, so the Alberta separatism is sort of a very distinct kind of thing. And there are many Albertans who feel deeply unsatisfied with the state of the Federation and have grievances and are interested in expressing that online and campaigning for that. And in fact, that's sort of a part of a healthy democracy, and that's what you want. The issue becomes if people are trying to profit off of it, or are trying to manipulate people, or are trying to astroturf their fellow Albertans into thinking that there's this mass movement. And in fact, there actually has been a lot of confusion in some of these online communities that we've been witnessing over a little while, where when push comes to shove and you really get into it, the number of Albertans who actually support secession is very low, but in their online communities, it's very popular. And so you get this sort of like disbelief. And you get some of this in responses to polling numbers during elections as well, where there's this sense that like, oh, the polls can't possibly be right. They're lying to me because in my community, everyone wants to separate. How is it even possible that this is the real polling number? And so in the Alberta case, we looked into it. In general, what we found is mostly authentic participation, but that authentic participation still represents a very small percentage of the Albertan population, most of whom strongly support staying in Canada.
Angus, why should Canadians be worried about this?
So Canadians are part of a democracy and care about their democracy. And ultimately, what you want in a democracy is a free and fair exchange of ideas with people who share your hope and your desire for a better future. The problem with astroturfing is it attacks that. So when you go online, which is now the primary place where people conduct politics and communicate about politics, and you don't know if the person who's saying they're Canadian is actually Canadian, and you don't know if they're trying to sell you something or convince you of something that isn't true, how can you actually, in good faith, engage in politics? How can you trust the system? How can you have hope for the future of your country? So astroturfing really attacks some of these integral principles of democracy, and every Canadian should be worried about that.
Angus, great to have you on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, we've shown you examples, but our next guest has made a career out of manufacturing moments like these. Adam Swart is an American and founder of Crowds on Demand. Adam, so great to have you on the program today.
Molly, thanks so much for having me with you.
So Adam, I'm curious, in simple terms, what does Crowds on Demand do?
Crowds on Demand is the largest protest company in the United States of America. We've been around for 13 years, and we specialize in organizing protests, advocacy campaigns, audiences, anything where you need a lot of people or to build a movement.
Okay, so if someone calls you up and says, hey, Adam, I need a crowd here, walk me through the process of how that happens.
Sure. So there's two ways that people do it. Sometimes people will come ready with an idea, ready with a narrative, signs. They just need us for the people. That's fine. And we do that a lot. That's at least half of what we do. But the other half is they say, hey, we need you to build a movement. Here's our objective, right? We'll build an advocacy group, hire leaders, hire canvassers, organize phone banking, emails to officials, organize demonstrations, rallies, leaflets, kind of a comprehensive campaign with sort of demonstrations and direct action at the center of it.
How fast can you get a crowd together?
We can get a crowd together within 24 hours if necessary, but
Wow.
That involves a lot of work from my team. So I always tell clients I like 5 days a week, or if it's a 1,000+ person crowd, we like to have more than a week, as you can imagine.
So who is calling you to, provide these services?
So it really depends. There's a lot of misinformation that we work for a lot of candidates, which
Yeah.
is actually not the case. It's mostly for advocacy groups, political organizations, sometimes well-to-do individuals, sometimes companies that have a need to kind of they're either in a dispute with a competitor or want to advocate for a position. Also, we do a lot of kind of non-protest related things such as PR stunts where you're a smaller company and you want to kind of advocate for yourself at a major conference and you want to make a splash. And so we'll do that as well.
Okay, so I'm really fascinated by these protesters for hire. Like who
Sure.
who are these people that you are hiring to go out to an event?
They're people who are genuinely passionate about the cause. And a lot of people don't believe that. But if you could see, we actually interview every participant at every event for at least 15 to 20 minutes, but even if you've participated in an event with us in the past. And the reason why we do that is we want everybody to be passionate about the subject they're protesting for, they're advocating for.
But I think a lot of critics, Adam, would say, how do you know that the people aren't motivated by money? Like I can tell you I'm for a cause, but I'm making some money from you.
Well, I guess I would put it to you this way, Molly. A lot of the people, the biggest critics of our business, are commentators on the internet and on TV who make 7, 8 figures per year, supposedly to genuinely speak about their opinions. So these people who say that my people who get a couple $100, $100 to go to an event are somehow doing it because they're just for the money, it's actually kind of a classist argument, and it's kind of demeaning to the people to suggest that they would sell out their basic convictions for, in the hundreds of dollars.
So you don't believe what you do is astroturfing?
I don't believe in the concept, this idea of grassroots where there's somehow this idea of a pure protest versus AstroTurf where there are these villains in some sort of compound planning how domination of the country, right? The reality is that every movement that you've ever heard of that's been successful has had a lot of money and a lot of interests behind it, whether it's civil rights, gay rights, Tea Party, MAGA. I mean, in Canada, the truckers movement, the unionists, right? The labor union, the First Nations movements. All of these movements have a ton of money, a ton of backing behind them.
I can get behind you on that. I can agree with you on that. I guess my difference is they're not always secretly funded. Like if I go to a crowd and there's a big protest and I don't know that this was organized by a group, then I would feel misled. Like, do you understand how people could feel like you're misleading the public in some way?
If you go to a rally, right, you may have trade unionists at the rally, right? And those union people are told to be there by their union. If they don't go, they get a terrible shift. And if they do go, they get a better shift. Are they disclosing that that's why they're there? There are people who go to rallies and they're there to post it on Instagram or on social media and say, here, I was there, I'm woke, I'm with the cause, right? Does that take away from their genuine belief? What I'm saying is that there are a lot of reasons to turn out to an event. The reality is people have different motivations for being somewhere, and being compensated a little bit of money is only one of the many motivations.
I've got to ask about this letter to Congress because I find this fascinating. You want other companies like yourself to be more transparent, to be disclosed, like we are funding this, we are behind this, we are promoting this. What is the end game for you there?
The end game is to try to bring a little bit more transparency to the process because, as I said, I am not against transparency, but I'm against the idea of I have to show my cards and no one else is going to show their cards. So I want to know if people who are political activists are there in an unpaid capacity, but they're paid generally as political activists. So what we're saying is we want to know what people's ulterior motives are. So I'm happy to reveal that if everyone else is also required to do so. So number one, and number two, because there's so much misinformation around there, I am worried that there are bad actors such as foreign governments and other sort of outside agitators who are seeking to use our beautiful freedoms that we have in the United States against us to manipulate us against each other. And this is a safeguard if implemented correctly.
Listen, the transparency conversation, I think our show can get behind that. That's very interesting, and we'll see if Congress does anything with it. Adam, great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Molly.
Still to come, how to avoid being duped by a fake movement. But first, our team has scoured the internet for misinfo and is ready to set the record straight. Is the Bank of Canada calling for Mark Carney to step down? Since last fall, viral posts have claimed that Tiff Macklem, the head of Canada's central bank, is blaming our Prime Minister for ruining Canada's economy and suggesting he should resign immediately. Listen, Canada's been in a stressful place since Donald Trump's trade war began last year. But are things so bad that our top economist is turning on the PM? I wouldn't bank on it. The Bank of Canada told Agence France Presse that Macklem made no such statement and also pointed out that his job is to set the interest rate, not tell us who should run the country. Is planet Earth about to lose its gravity? Rumors are circulating about Project Anchor, a so-called secret mission by NASA to prepare for a gravitational anomaly later this year. Supposedly, Earth will lose its gravitational pull for a few seconds sometime in August. That could cause millions of deaths as cars and objects and people float up in the sky and come crashing down. Okay, let's bring this back down to Earth. Our planet has gravity because its gigantic size attracts objects to it, which is why things fall to the ground. NASA told Snopes that only changes if Earth loses a lot of its mass, and that's not happening anytime soon. And finally, a wild one. You might have seen these images online, claiming a mountain lion broke into a pet store and raided its catnip supply. But as the Canadian Press points out, it likely isn't real. The original image seems to come from this unrelated video that trails back to 2018. And maybe more importantly, no major news outlets have reported on a big cat break-in. And take it from me, if this really happened, journalists would be all over it. Be careful. Even Google's AI was fooled by the story, but now you don't have to be. And that's your reality check. Now you're in the know. Coming up on Big If True, we explore the free birth movement. Some mothers are choosing to give birth without doctors or midwives. Online misinformation has been linked to infant deaths and triggered warnings from health officials. Back to our main topic, astroturfing. How do we know what's a real movement and what's not? Beatrice Wayne is here to help us out. She's a director of research and policy at the Samara Center for Democracy. Beatrice, so great to have you on the program today.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so I'm curious, are there clues, Beatrice, that an in-person protest or a petition isn't authentic?
Absolutely. So I think trust and verify is a good way to approach things. So be curious, be interested, ask questions, but also see, are there any trusted organizations that are affiliated with this protest, with this petition? Who has signed on to it? What is the history of the organizations? Were they recently created? Do they have transparency about who is on their board of directors? Who is involved? Do a little background research to understand which organizations are involved, what people are involved, and how much this particular issue has been, there's been active grassroots organizing around it. No campaign just emerges out of nothing. There's usually a strong history of activism and organizing that leads to larger protests, to petitions. So dig in a little, ask some questions and be curious. And that's a good way to ensure that what you're participating in is what you think you're engaging in.
Do a little homework. Beatrice, we just talked to a gentleman who, owns a company that hires people to protest. And he told me he doesn't even believe in the term astroturfing. What would be your response to that?
I think it's an important term because it's a phenomenon that we encounter daily online. It's very likely that people will see some form of an astroturfing campaign. And by that, I think, it's mostly important because it captures inauthenticity. And I think that the importance of understanding what is and is not authentic engagement, either in person or online, is crucial, because if you don't understand that, you are not getting an accurate understanding of what Canadian public opinion is, what people feel about particular issues. If there is no authenticity, then there is no way for elected officials to make strong policy that represents the will of the people. If it is all just coordinated, funded from outside sources, that there's no room for real democracy. I think this is a real concern, and that's why terms like astroturfing are important and useful.
What do we need to watch for online?
So there's some clues, there's some indicators, things you can look at are there numerical numbers? Are the usernames followed by a lot of numbers? Does that correlate with recently created accounts? So accounts that were just created have numerical usernames associated with it. And are they all posting? So are these accounts that are coordinated all posting only about a single issue? There's also a question of timing. So if all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a lot of coordinated posting about a particular issue where there was none leading up to it, that can be suspicious. And also you can look for identical language. So if every account is posting about a topic or a person using the exact same language, that's also an indicator. But I think it's crucial to say there's no silver bullet. There's no giant pointing sign saying, this is definitely astroturfing and this isn't. We need to be really skeptical with the rise of sort of really sophisticated but easy to access AI generated technologies. We know that you could set up autonomously posting accounts that post with sophistication and at scale. So right now it's very easy, or it's easier and easier to create this sort of inauthentic engagement, to create this sort of online astroturfing. But also go offline, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends and family and people in your community about this issue. Are they aware of it? Have they heard about it before this sudden influx of posts? Do they care about it? And can you talk to your elected officials about this? Getting offline and having these community conversations is a great way to engage with the issues you care about.
Yeah, sometimes we can just be like engulfed in it, and then we're like, oh, everybody cares about this. But until you actually talk to other people, I think that's a great point. What will happen, Beatrice, if we cannot get a handle on astroturfing campaigns or being able to spot them in some way?
I think it's part and parcel of a very polluted information ecosystem that we exist in right now. It is very hard to trust the information that we see online, and we see people moving further and further away from each other and moving further away from any sort of civic engagement, because if what you're seeing online is really not trustworthy, is divisive, and the sort of grassroots organizing you see turns out to be fake, that just pushes you away from any sort of wanting to engage in the political process and civically at all. So that's a concern, but it's also just a concern that it's adding to this polluted information ecosystem where none of us live in a shared reality. We are all relying on misunderstanding of what public opinion is, and it's not just a problem for Canadian citizens not knowing what's real or what's true, but also elected officials. They go online to learn about what their constituents care about or interested about and look to for policy recommendations. If they are primarily being influenced by astroturfing campaigns, this is going to shape Canadian policy in a way that really degrades the democratic will of the people.
I got 30 seconds here, Beatrice. I just have to ask, are there, a lot of times astroturfing comes out around major events, political issues. Is there any events that might be vulnerable in 2026 to these type of campaigns?
We know from research across the world that particularly events related to anti-immigrant sentiment and also LGBTQ+ issues can be a vector for astroturfing campaigns. So particularly around those two issues, I would be wary, and I would look to verify the information you see online.
Okay, do a little homework. Beatrice, great to have you on the show today.
Happy to be here.
Not sure who to trust in a world of misinformation? Come to Big If True. Find us on Instagram and YouTube. Visit our website for extra content. Email us to get your thoughts on the show.
Well, next time you feel emotionally pulled to join a protest group or a movement, you might want to do a little more digging. Maybe touch grass to see if the roots are real. I'm Molly Thomas. See you next Sunday at 8 or anytime online.